So item 1A, presentation by the public. Any presentations or issues raised by the public? If not, let's move on. Item 1B, commission communications. Any issues raised by the commission members? No? Okay, let's move on to item number 2. Can I have,
Could I have the commissioners double check and make sure their microphones are on as well?
okay.
Thank you.
Check.
And do I need to do a
Check.
roll check?
I'm sorry?
Name call about presence?
Yes. You could ask the Jennifer Schmidt if she would like to call roll.
Okay. Could you please call roll? Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Stark,
Present.
Commissioner Peterson,
Here.
Vice Chair Zhu,
Present?
Commissioner Tanner. Present. Commissioner Geltke.
Present.
Thank you. All, and let's see, what's his name? Chair Glankler is absent, and Commissioner
Thomas.
Wetzel is absent.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's move on to item number 2. Any motion to approve the minutes of the May 4th, 2015 meeting?
I so move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, minutes approved. Let's move on to item 3, consideration of memorial sign restrictions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. The staff recommendation to create a guideline of not installing additional memorial signs within the public right-of-way. As a background, the city has received in the past requests to install memorial signs, and based on individual needs, have then determined whether or not they're feasible to be installed or not. The frequency of these requests are increasing, and so we reached out, not having real guidelines, that we needed to create basic guidelines. So we reached out to neighboring agencies to determine what they are doing, and we found that pretty much all agencies that we connected, local agencies, do not allow the installation of memorial signs. There was one agency that tolerated basically memorials such as candles and flowers and pictures as long as they're not impeding pedestrians or other motorists in the public right-of-way to remain for 30 days, but after that they will be removed by either the city staff or by whoever placed them. The only agency that has currently a guideline is Caltrans, we found. Their reasons for installing signs are very stringent, and as of yet, there has been no sign installed within Yolo County at all. I have attachment A here that has the guidelines of Caltrans in it, and it describes a little bit more further what these restrictions are. That's about it. Any questions? So we pretty much asked, for input, what your take is on that.
Any questions from commissioners?
So it looks like the recommendation is to not install memorial signs within the public right-of-way, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
That was just in case there was questions, a little bit more about what the signs look like, or whether we have 2 installations where there will be. So we.
It looks like the Caltrans program's limited to drinking driving accidents. And
Correct.
that seems kind of interesting because it kind of seems to value certain tragedies over others. So
Right.
pedestrian-involved fatalities, not so much, but if it was a drunk driver, then I feel like that could be a policy concern for the city.
Yes,
to do
yes.
something like
The
that.
signs, the city has installed 2 signs, memorial signs, and they reflect basically the Caltrans sign where it says, "Please don't drink and drive," in memory of the victim's name.
So you're asking for information and advice, or are you asking for approval?
Both.
The
I mean,
commission.
if it's acceptable by the commission to go with the staff recommendation, and that's what I'm looking for. However, if there's any recommendations otherwise, definitely they will be noted.
So, any motion to accept the recommendation as proposed?
I'm not sure. Are we being asked to recommend anything, or are we just being asked to provide comments? Sometimes I'm not clear about the staff recommendation on this.
If I may, what we're asking for is guidance for moving toward a policy with regard to memorial signs in the city. So we're looking for some kind of direction from the commission that we could later on take to city council, which would include either the recommendation, it would include the recommendation that we're proposing, but also any comments from the commissioners and any additional recommendations that the commissioners might have.
Thank you.
So any additional recommendations on this matter, commissioners? No? Okay. So I guess I'll recommend that we accept the recommendation provided by the staff.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I'll move the recommendation, but to open for conversation, if that's all right. It seems to me that it seemed a little unclear, I think, because it was a negative recommendation, I think, is what you're asking for?
Yeah,
You were
yeah,
asking for
yeah.
a recommendation of a guideline, and the guideline is, we won't install memorial signs.
Correct, yes,
We already
yes,
have
a little
2, and we're
confusing.
not going to install more.
Yes.
Okay, do we have any background on the 2 that were installed and why they were chosen?
Those 2 were chosen, but staff was directed by city management to investigate this further and to install if they were warranted.
Okay.
So that was really the factor that determined that these 2 signs be installed.
Okay, so we don't know, we don't have a background on why those 2 were chosen, and do we know how many were rejected?
At this point, there's only 1 sign that has been rejected.
One sign?
Yeah.
Okay, and do we have reasons for why it was rejected? I know this is going to why you want a guideline. I recognize that, but I also, in
Right.
order to get a full
That's-
understanding of the situation.
That sign was because it was not directly requested by a family member,
Mhm.
so that's why
Okay.
it was rejected.
Okay, and what, do you feel that the Caltrans guidelines would be inappropriate within our jurisdiction to adopt guidelines that were similar in order to allow for this?
But our recommendation is much more to follow local guidelines of what other jurisdictions instead of Caltrans. When I talked actually to the gentleman at Caltrans, he wondered why this was even a policy that they follow, but he was basically following what the law said. I'm not saying it's unreasonable, but definitely staff's feeling was stronger about following the other local jurisdictions, particularly in consideration of over-signing of areas where we have signs, and then there's also a certain morbidity factor to it, having memorial signs installed throughout the city.
There is. Just to speak personally, 2 years ago, there was a young woman who was killed about 200 yards from where I live, from our house. And I believe it was a drunk driver who was responsible for her death. And I don't have a sense of, I think you said morbidity as I pass, but it is a strong reminder. And personally, I don't mind if people feel a sense of feel disturbed
Yeah.
when they come upon that. Are there parts of the city that may have a problem because there might be multiple signs? And is this, identifying particular locations that need to be worked on?
I'm not at liberty to know that. I mean,
Okay.
I wouldn't know whether or not a neighborhood would feel strongly one way or the other.
Okay.
The transportation section in general tries to minimize the amount of signs that are being installed. because of the guidelines that are being set forth by the federal state standards to minimize signage. And so that, and like I mentioned, other jurisdiction. Now, not to say that the commission cannot recommend it otherwise, so if they feel so.
Right. And then, would this lead to a recommendation of not installing signs? Would it lead to a potential conflict with individuals setting up memorials, temporary memorials?
So what we felt was that actually the most jurisdiction, or all jurisdiction except one, rejected completely or any installation, but we felt that the 30 days was really prudent to honor whoever has passed at that location. So we would follow that, where 30 days, the pictures or the candles could be installed, but after that, they would have to be removed.
Okay, well then I would like to modify my movement and move that we adopt the recommendation with the amendment that be stipulated in the policy to allow the 30 days for individuals to set up memorials, as long as it doesn't impede the right-of-way.
So we have a new movement. Any second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move to item 4, consideration of transportation development claim for fiscal year 2015 to 2016.
Good evening, Commissioners. It is respectfully recommended that the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission review and endorse the Public Works Department's effort to prepare a Transportation Development Act claim in the amount of $2,093,629.54 for the fiscal year of 2015 and 16. This is a claim that is made out of 2 components. One of them is an STA claim of $5,000, and the other one is a LTF claim for $2,098,629. This is a routine claim that we submit to TDA on a yearly basis, usually around this time. Obviously, the commission is new, so this is the first time that we come to the commission. Normally, we would go directly to the city council. We submit the actual claim with work plans and backup documentation that shows why the claim is being made, and it's submitted to TDA, and then we receive the funds that help us provide bus services and also paratransit services in the city through the Yolo County Transportation District. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. The fiscal year 2014 shortage, is that a standard? And I'm sure the amount varies from year to year, but is this is an estimate of this year's needs and plus a shortage from what didn't happen from last year?
From the previous year. So again, every year we submit a claim, and it is based on expected expenses. Sometimes we hit the mark, sometimes we don't. And so in this case, we had a shortage because we requested few dollars last fiscal year, and so we're trying to make up for that now.
Great, thank you.
Any additional questions?
And what we seek from the commission is endorsement that we move forward with preparing the claim.
Any motion?
For everybody else, motion that we move forward with the claim.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's move on to item number 5. Commission workshop, Broadway Bridge feasibility study.
Good evening, Commissioners. The next 3 items are going to be presented by me. The item before you is the Broadway Bridge Feasibility Study Commission Workshop. The purpose of the workshop itself is to give you a background on the project, as well as present you with the latest project developments that have occurred over the last several weeks. The consultant team, CH2M, is here in the audience here to give you a presentation and we'll provide you with some answers to any questions that you might have about the project. The staff report that's before you provides some background on the project, including cooperative efforts between the cities of West Sacramento and City of Sacramento in defining the purpose and need for the Sacramento River Crossing study, guiding policies, directing bridge design, and efforts to obtain funding for the project. Back in March 2015, a cooperative agreement between the City of Sacramento and City of West Sacramento was executed, as well as the contract for engineering services with CH2M to prepare the feasibility study for Broadway Bridge. The feasibility study itself will analyze up to 3 alignments and compare the feasibility of the bridge based on horizontal and vertical clearance requirements, review of potential bridge types, an analysis of preliminary circulation. It'll review potential costs and identify any key policies between the 2 cities that the bridge would need to adhere to. This time, I'd like to introduce Mike Higgins and Greg Oslin with CH2M. They're going to provide you with information on the project, initiate the workshop. Staff is asking the commission to hear the presentation and provide any kind of feedback or questions, and we'll work to answer any questions you might have.
Good evening, Commissioners. As Jason said, I'm Mike Higgins with CH2M, and pleasure to be here tonight to give you an update on the Broadway Bridge feasibility study efforts. We'll get this fired up here. We've got several slides to present to you, and with opportunity for questions at the end. There we go. So as Jason's staff report explains, in 2011, the Sacramento River Crossing Alternative Study looked at the need for and identified the need for 2 new crossings across the Sacramento River, one which is known as the North Market area there on the slide at the top, which is being addressed by the I Street Bridge, which I believe there's an item on after this to discuss. Also a crossing in the South Market area, which is the focus of our efforts tonight with the Broadway Bridge feasibility study. The connections being generally between Broadway on the Sacramento side of the river and South River Road, 15th Street on the West Sacramento side of the river. As Jason said, the City of West Sacramento is heading up this feasibility study efforts with cooperation with City of Sacramento, and we initiated the feasibility study a few months ago. So the study objectives for this phase, one of our key objectives is to identify any fatal flaws that may arise from the bridge alignments or connections or crossings and bridge types. It's also to inform stakeholders of those options regarding those connections and alignments, gather stakeholder input during this phase, and help support the environmental scoping, which will come immediately after this phase during the environmental and preliminary engineering process that will follow. So one of our first steps in the process, which is a key step to address the horizontal and vertical clearances Jason was speaking about, is coordinating with the Coast Guard as they have the priority here in terms of identifying navigational concerns along the Sacramento River. So on April 28th, we took a boat ride with the Coast Guard out in the location of the range of alternatives that are shown on the map here that we would analyze during this feasibility study. And based upon the boat ride, the Coast Guard identified that this bridge would require 170 feet of horizontal clearance for any vessels traveling through. That matches Tower Bridge to the north, which is great news because it helps leverage our options for movable bridge types in this vicinity. The other interesting item to note, as a result of that coordination, the Coast Guard and the auxiliarists determined that the prime navigation channel is actually on the west side of the river and not so much in the center. So that creates an added change to our assumptions. The Coast Guard actually has sent out a formal waterway public user notice, which actually concluded today to receive comment from waterway users on these assumptions that we're talking about today. And as of this afternoon, they notified us that there were no comments received from waterway users to help solidify these clearances that the Coast Guard has preliminarily set. So as I said, the great news is that the 170-foot horizontal clearance enables any of the 3 movable bridge types to be used in this location. And those are a vertical lift bridge, which is similar to the Tower Bridge to the north, a double leaf bascule bridge, which there are some on the delta to the south of us, and a swing bridge similar to the I Street Bridge to the north as well. So that gives us multiple options which we're vetting during this phase to identify the merits of each bridge type. And with that, I'll have Greg come up and dive into some more detail on the movable bridge types and other considerations.
Thanks, Mike. Greg Osland with CH2M. Talk a little bit about the bridge choices that the city has in front of them. And the mouse is, it's got a lot of buttons on it. Left. You're going to have to help me.
I believe you can also roll the mouse.
That left. Okay, there we go. Thanks. So a couple different choices here with the, when we first started the study and we were hearing the feedback on I Street, they have an opening width that's quite a bit wider based on their unique circumstances there. But at 170 feet, it gives us the chance to look at virtually all the movable bridge types that are out there. The first here is the vertical lift. So the Tower Bridge is a great example of a classic vertical lift. It's a steel truss structure. There are, and those definitely have a certain look to them. And so that's a choice, but we also have some new choices out there that are out there in the last maybe 10, 15 years that have been developed. And one of these is shown here where we would use concrete pylons with a steel isotropic deck. And the deck that I'm talking about in Northern California, there's one for the Carquinez Bridge. So it's a very slender deck. It's essentially constructed like a boat hull. So steel plate, very slender, and visually has a lot different look than your typical vertical lift. And so that's one that we'd be looking at in addition to the conventional. The other one that was really right on the bubble in terms of feasibility for this location was the double leaf bascule. So the single leaf bascule, so where the leaf lifts up from one side only, that's not feasible here because it is at 170 feet, it's just too long. A double leaf bascule is feasible, and the only special detail that might be required at this location is if you have rail, streetcar in the future. There's a device that would have to be designed and constructed in the center. Essentially, when the leaves come together, a pin is engaged to join them together so that it doesn't deflect at all, because vehicles can take some deflection, but transit vehicles cannot. So that would be a special detail at some additional cost. The bascule, if you're going to line out some of its primary benefits, it's going to be the lowest, one of the lowest of all the structures. And also something really unique here, because we have, Mike mentioned, the navigation way on this river is not dead center. So with it off to the side, there's going to be some symmetry issues potentially. With a bridge like this, with a bascule bridge, you could do the movable span in the navigation way, and then you could mimic that look with your fixed spans off the side. So when you're all done, you look at the bridge, and it's going to look symmetric, but one of those spans is going to open. So that's the benefit, one of the benefits of a bascule. Another possibility that we have here is a swing bridge like I Street that you see out there. Typical downside to a swing bridge is you end up with a very large center pier that everything rotates on. It's a very efficient bridge because it's all counterweighted. So when a swing bridge is operating, it's the left and right spans are the same mass, so it's just very efficient. If you do have a single opening, the way we have here, we can do, one idea here is to do a bobtail design where essentially you still have a swing bridge with a center pier,
You have the main span, and then you have a big, large weight on the other span that mimics the weight and balances out the spans. So, and that could be a very unique solution here as well. Moving on to the traffic analysis, we have done the first model runs for the traffic, for projected traffic volumes on the bridge. You can see here if we were to do a 2-lane bridge, it would draw somewhere around 31,000 trips a day, ADT. If we were to do a 4-lane bridge, that jumps to about 47,000 vehicles a day. And what's happening there is some pent-up demand, some latent demand in the system. So if you make the bridge wider, it's going to pull more traffic off of the adjacent crossings, primarily Pioneer Bridge. Now, if you do that, one of the tricks that we'll have to be paying, or one of the issues we'll have to be paying a lot of attention to is how does the system that this bridge joins to, how does it handle that additional traffic? So that'll be a part, not so much this phase, but the next phase in terms of looking at the network and how you best incorporate all of this change in traffic pattern.
How would you classify the functionality of the bridge? And, you know, we have a system of collectors, arterials that relate to traffic volumes. And I'm trying to understand how this fits into some context of the circulation within the city of Sacramento and West Sacramento.
It's a good question. I think it's, if it were a 4-lane bridge, it clearly would be an arterial with that type of traffic volume. At 2-lane, it could be, I think it's acting, and we'll have to see how the traffic simulation, what it tells us, but it would be operating somewhere between a collector and an arterial. At that volume, it's, you know, it's low enough. Give you an example, the 2-lane bridge out in Folsom, the Rainbow Bridge, that carries, at times, that's carried as many as 45,000 cars a day. So it is a 2-lane bridge, but it can move a lot of traffic. But the key there is not so much the bridge width, it's what's happening at the intersections on each end and how does it carry the traffic.
So would a collector be like I Street currently? Does that have the function of a collector street, if you will, in terms of traffic volume? And
I Street's lighter,
Yeah.
but I Street is so narrow that it actually impedes flow because there's it's kind of these side friction effects. No shoulders, very narrow lanes. I think they're 11-foot lanes, if that. So, and that's just the auto traffic. So in addition to that, we've got bikes and peds, and how do they experience the bridge? I think they're just meeting the other day and talking about our upcoming public meeting. One of the questions we'll want to ask the public is, how do they expect that they would use the bridge? I want to really get a sense of how many might drive it, how many might walk it, how many want to ride their bikes, do they want to stop in the center and take in the view of the city and the river? All of those answers will really play into any further details.
so when you say the staff report talks about a neighborhood-friendly bridge, and I'm trying to relate that to either the size or the functionality of the bridge. Does that mean something to you in terms of the design of the bridge, that it's neighborhood-friendly?
Well, I think, so the neighborhood-friendly definition that both councils, I believe, adopted at the conclusion of the last study. My understanding from both cities is that the details of what that meant weren't really nailed down. So my own opinion is, and it's just mine, is that the neighborhood-friendly definition will be unique for Broadway, and it will probably be different than I.
But it would include pedestrians, bike circulation, as well as auto?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that seems very clear that all modes, including streetcar, will need to be and should be accommodated, so.
If this is time, was a good page to ask my questions as well. Does the bridge fit into with those various scenarios with the SACOG's SCS? And were there any VMT calculations done?
We can get those numbers. The model runs that we've done initially are just basic travel demand output from our traffic subconsultant, Fair and Pierce. We have we have the ability to get VMT. From my own experience on traffic studies downtown and the urban area, it'll be really important how big an area we select, because we know that this is a really important project, but if you pick a big area, the VMT effect gets diluted. So in terms of a, VMT reduction or increase on a large scale, it's going to get lost in those numbers. So we need to be careful about how big an area we pick.
Right, well, yeah, and I was also thinking in terms of the 2-lane versus 3-lane versus 4-lane. If you turn it from a collector to an arterial, that would have a different impact on regional VMT, I would assume, than if it were acting as a collector and moving people to and from to different neighborhoods versus, bringing people in from very long distances who are deciding to go, one way or the other.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm just speculating here. We don't have all the numbers, but because of the fact that this is a river crossing, and that those trips are now being served by other bridges, but albeit very few. It's a constrained number of bridges. Primarily, this bridge would take traffic, some amount of traffic from Pioneer, and I suppose increasingly less from, say, Tower or High. So the question is it creating entirely new trips? Is it going to change the way the two cities develop and and how much services they provide on each side? Those are all good questions, and we're going to be paying attention to that for sure. But in general, I think that we're moving trips from one facility to another, local trips that are now using Pioneer probably. So the origin and destination, where they're going, that's what we really want to dig into in the next phase.
Right, and if the bridge can induce the kind of development that is local to the bridge, from say a neighborhood-friendly bridge concept, then that would have a different impact on VMT, both regionally and then, with what West Sacramento would be adding.
Yeah, and I think, with a bridge like this, it's more than a transportation link. It's there's there's a lot of other benefits for a lot larger group of folks. I mean, me personally, I love to ride my bike, and if I'm going across bridges, then there's a Belvedere in the middle. I'm going to stop. I like to stop and just check it out, have a moment before I ride on to work or whatever. So we really need to recognize that and define what it is that the communities want this bridge to be for them, because it's going to be here for a long time, very long time.
On a related note to VMT, because I really would highly recommend that you get those numbers, just in light especially of 743 being passed last year and a shift from LOS. And then also looking at those LOS numbers, that's why I was reminded of that. That's the kind of traffic pattern is going to be moving. And I would like also to encourage that when you look at LOS, you don't just define it as automobile LOS.
Right.
But you can look at level of service for all, because there is a direct correlation between improved automobile LOS and then safety concerns and a reduction in LOS for bicycles and pedestrians in particular. And then also, considering the long-term transit needs, I really appreciate you including the trolley streetcar design in there. There are also other options that may be cheaper as well in the long run, such as bus-only lanes. And this particular location, connecting with Jefferson Boulevard and how large Jefferson Boulevard is, it may be an option to pursue down the road, some form of bus-only or BRT instead of rail, which is considerably more expensive.
Yeah, I guess, that's excellent input and advice. I think that the thing that just strikes me about these types of projects is they're going to be here for 100 years, so we really need to build in some flexibility. We don't know what the world's going to be in 100 years. It's going to be different than it is now. That seems certain.
And this bridge will actually influence what will be in 100 years, so I appreciate that work.
Yep. So just a little bit about the connections on the, this is on the West Sac side. And here we're showing kind of the most obvious connection that would connect right to 15th. And let me just preface this by saying, on both sides of the river, we just kind of took the constraints off our minds and said, what are the possibilities? And this is kind of an obvious one. A layperson was looking at this, they would say, yeah, you should tie to 15th. That's what this represents. Problem with it, of course, is that the city has an intention to extend Riverfront Street down and tie into 15th. So that's something we're very much aware of, and it may make this alternative really not feasible. But we're bringing it just to show you an example of the most northerly connection. This next one is pretty much the most southerly connection that we could provide, and this connection ties into about 400 to 500 feet, a good solid block south of 15th to make sure traffic operations are working well between those two intersections. And here's a little bit of output, and hopefully these make sense. I don't, these heat maps, I'm not totally in love with these, but let's walk through this. So the one on the left there with a 15th Street connection, so this is that northerly connection that I mentioned first. The takeaway from that diagram is, do we have a pointer on this? Or do you have one? Or actually, no, I'm sorry, I can just use this. So the takeaway is if we connect all the way across 15th and tie into Jefferson, these line weights are pretty equal, indicating that the traffic split north and south would be split evenly between Jefferson, shown on the left, and then South River on the right. Now, if you chose to tie, as shown here, you would tie into that southern alignment where it just tees into South River. You can see not much happening over in Jefferson. It puts much more load on South River. So that potentially could cause the project to have to increase mitigation costs, expand South River even further to the south. But it does preserve more capacity on Jefferson. So we understand that there's a sensitive balance there. Relieving traffic on Jefferson and by the way, anything that we do here will relieve traffic on Jefferson at 50. Many of those trips would be diverted to the new bridge. A little bit about the output that we're getting on the traffic study for the SAC side. So similar kind of idea here. This one over here is a X Street direct connection. So we do have a concept where as it comes into Sacramento, into the grid, it would tie both to X Street along the WX pair, and then it would also tie to Broadway. And you can see here, if you do that, it balances flows between Broadway and X Street, shown here. Now, on this one, this is kind of the other extreme. We would not tie to X Street directly. This one would route all the traffic on Broadway. And you can see in here, particularly the most western segment, it's heavy versus the line weight here. So trade-offs with both of these. So all of these will be advanced to the environmental process for further consideration. So the next steps, July 15th, we just found out today that we're confirmed to provide a city council workshop, similar information. Then on the 23rd, we've scheduled a public workshop at elementary school on the other side of the river. And much of the information we have here and some other things we'll be providing to the public. Then in the fall, we'll provide an update on the results. We're just now getting real cost information, and we're developing more specific details about what the bridges, the configuration would be. So that'll all come together in the fall. And then by December, we would complete the feasibility work, and the city would then proceed in early 16 to the next phase, which is funded under the Tiger Planning Grant for the environmental studies. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer, discuss anything that's on your mind.
Any questions from commission members? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and I apologize that I came in the middle of it. Traffic on I-5 and north of Bakersfield is a little dicey right now. But anyway, one of the questions I had was with the development of that area of South River Road, where the fuel tankers and all that's going to be removed. Is a feasibility study kind of tying into the future development of that phase to be kind of another portion of the bridge district? And you may have already addressed that.
Well, I'll take a first cut at it, and then you may want to jump in. So essentially the way we're approaching it, so the bridge is a long-term investment. We understand that the city's intention in that area are to do something different than tank farms. And so essentially our direction has been to not necessarily look at tank farms as, must avoid if this were a shorter term project. So we are presuming that there would be redevelopment, heavy redevelopment in that area. And so that's why that southern crossing goes right through that property. Kind of looks strange when you look at it first, but this is, again, a long-range project.
If I could, Commissioners, kind of add on to that. So a couple of things I heard, I wanted to backtrack a little bit. This bridge is identified as a long-range planning strategy for SACOG. It is identified in our general plan and has been a strategy for development in the Pioneer Bluff area and the Bridge District for an extended period of time. The area that you're talking about is Pioneer Bluff, and that is the transition from its current industrial uses to a more urbanized use similar to the Bridge District, as was mentioned. The tank farms that this bridge alignment is going into is actually property of the Shell Corporation. Shell has been in touch with us, and we've been in touch with them, and they are a partner with us in the planning for this bridge. Long-term, yes, all the industrial uses that are in the Pioneer Bluff redevelopment area are expected to be transitioning over the course of many years, just as it took many years for Bridge District to get to where it's at now. And as you may recall, if you look at some of the older maps, if you haven't been in the city long-term, but if you've been here for a long time, you know that the transition has happened relatively rapidly for the Bridge District, and we're anticipating the same thing to happen over in Pioneer Bluff. And one more thing, with regard to neighborhood-friendly bridge concept, the neighborhood-friendly definition was actually adopted back in 2011, I believe it's October, by the city of Sacramento. It was accepted but not adopted by the city of West Sacramento. But we were partners with SACOG in developing the concepts behind a neighborhood-friendly bridge definition, which included, I believe, 6 criteria, which included that it be low, that it be multimodal, that it have aesthetic value that's appreciated by both communities, that it wouldn't require significant widening of the approaches to the bridges, and that wouldn't die off into a neighborhood or approach into residential neighborhoods directly. I believe there's one other criteria that I'm forgetting at this point, but I could always look that up and then provide that for you. Did I answer all the questions? Yeah.
Can I have a quick question? Because you proposed multiple, like 4 different designs of the bridges, right? And do you have any estimated cost attached to each type? So from a city's perspective, it's the best to use the minimized cost to achieve the best goal. And also as a resident, in addition to all the concerns you have mentioned about neighborhood friendly, I guess it would be nice, but it would eventually turn out to be a landmark for City of West Sac. That's additional utility
Right.
added. So is any concerns about combining utility with minimized cost and maximized functioning of the bridge?
Yeah, I think there's a real trade-off there. I mean, a great example in California is up in Redding with the Sundial Bridge. I mean, they chose to kind of go long, and that was an expensive bridge, beautiful bridge, and they actually have people going to Redding just to look at it and stop, and so, and that creates all sorts of benefits. I think in terms of the basic cost of this bridge, we're just starting to get back our estimates so the estimate's really made up of the cost of the movable portion. So a movable bridge, just some background, a movable bridge is in the order of 8 to 10 times more expensive than a static bridge. Because it's a machine, it's a large machine. And so that just gives you a little perspective. So we haven't put all the numbers together, but I can tell you that it's probably going to be for a 2-lane, and these are present dollars, they're not escalated out to the future. So you might be in the 120 million. I think what's unique about this project too is not just the bridge, but it's, from the riverfront way over underneath 5 till you connect to the kind of the business district of Broadway's a long run. And then over on the West Sac side, there could be a lot of street work, and how much of that is directly related to the project and how much of that is related to just general redevelopment. So, and these tank farms, right? So the numbers there could be a big range, but I think for me, I know there's some higher numbers that have been quoted. They're probably a little conservative. They're for 4-lane facilities. And they may even be adjusted for the future. But if you're just looking at a number, the best number I could give you would be about 120 million present dollars for a 2-lane bridge. Probably what we're looking at.
Okay. Can I ask a little bit more about what's the benefit of having a movable bridge? Because I would expect, you mentioned, not only it costs more to build in the first place, but also it requires additional maintenance fees, I would expect.
Yep.
So if a static bridge is definitely cheaper, so if the benefit is just to allow some, gigantic ships to move through, then why don't we just build the static higher so that
Right.
cost-wise it saves money?
So in the past, we have, not as a part of this study, but work we've done in the past, we have developed, just to see if it was even possible, a high bridge. So I guess a couple of thoughts here. First of all, the Coast Guard has jurisdiction. They won't, under almost any circumstances, allow you to have less vertical clearance than what is enjoyed now. So right now, so that means we'd have to be as high as the Pioneer Bridge, essentially. Or actually, Pioneer's the controlling vertical clearance out there. So we would have to do that. So that's a very high bridge. Imagine being on the shore looking up and seeing Pioneer and then seeing the local bridge just as high. So that doesn't really meet the definition of neighborhood friendly. And then the other issue is that by the time you get up and over and come down, we'd actually I believe you'd have to cross over South River Road. And if you cross over and still want access, now you got to do something that starts to look like an interchange. And so it gets very expensive very fast because it's not just a up and over, it's a big up and over with interchanges. So not a lot of benefit there. Normally there would be, but in this case, I think both cities have taken the position that really, given the circumstances, the movable is really the only feasible to meet the neighborhood-friendly definition and just kind of physically what's possible out there.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we looking to coordinate the design on this bridge with maybe the I Street Bridge to kind of have a consistent look to our waterfront? Because, the Tower Bridge is kind of our iconic bridge. Nobody really likes the design of the I Street Bridge. So is this what we want Sacramento's waterfront to look like, kind of 3 disjointed bridges? Or are we looking at maybe coordinating the appearance? Because you would think it would be very pretty with 3 tower bridges along.
Yeah. So you could, I'm not an architect, but, and everybody's got their opinion, and that's great. I think you could take a couple different, I think the idea of coordination is really important, not only for the visual, but also the operation. Because right now, if this all happens the way it might, we're going to have one bridge, I Street, operated by the UP. We're going to have another bridge, not sure what we're going to call it yet, but the new bridge, the new I Street, operated jointly by the cities, and Broadway operated jointly by the cities, and Tower probably operated jointly by the cities in the end. So then with technology, how can we put it all together and have one operating system and reduce cost and just operate it with cameras all from one traffic center? So that's an interesting part. the part you're bringing up, I think, is also very interesting, and I think you could, and I think it's something that we need input on, not just our project, because we're one project, but all of the projects, and that is, what's the overall theme? And, you know, you could decide SAC's going to be the place that you can go to see the old and the modern all together. You can see an example of Tower, which is a classic, 1930s Art Deco vertical lift, and you could go downstream and see the new Broadway, and it's styled after something like the Bordeaux Bridge in France, totally modern. You don't see any machinery. It's all in these pylons, elegant, slender deck. That might be a way to go as well. And I mean, I'll just tell you my personal preference. I don't think we should be necessarily locked into anything. I mean, you go to Europe and they love doing totally modern right next to totally traditional, and go to the Louvre and there's a pyramid in the middle of the courtyard. So that's not for me, though. That's not for us. It's really for you and the citizens from both sides to really kind of come together on what this bridge should be. We're not there yet. We're just at that earliest stage, kind of doing a very geeky engineering part of it, just to, is there anything that's fatal? Is there anything that we can't do? And so far, I don't think there's anything that's really fatal. Possibilities are on the table, except for the single leaf bascule. That appears to be not feasible, given the span length.
Greg, if I could add to that, it's important to remember that this is a feasibility study. As Greg had mentioned, there's a lot more steps that we need to take. With I Street Bridge, it's a little bit different story, and I'll give you an update on that. Where we're looking at 170-foot horizontal clearance for Broadway Bridge, we're looking at 278-foot span horizontal clearance for I Street Bridge. So what you're talking about is a significantly wider bridge that's going to require probably eliminating a double leaf bascule as well as a single leaf bascule. If we were to do a double leaf bascule for I Street Bridge, it would be the largest, I believe, in the country. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much cost that would take to accommodate that. So even if you were to looking as a community to coordinate this, if the city of Sacramento and city of West Sacramento residents all decided that, well, we want to have a coordinated approach, it may not be feasible between one bridge that has a significantly different horizontal span and different structural requirements than the Broadway Bridge. With the I Street Bridge, we're a little bit farther along. They are currently in the PAED phase, which is project approval environmental documentation, whereas we're in feasibility analysis for Broadway. So the PAED phase for Broadway isn't going to begin until the beginning of 2016. So it's running on a little bit different track. But what you're going to start seeing is I Street Bridge moving forward, and some of these questions that you have as far as aesthetics are going to start to be answered with that project before you start seeing it happen with Broadway.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
Steve?
and I know I don't know everything about I, but, when you're looking at I, you have a real context there. You have a 100-year-old swing bridge sitting there. And so, I think they're trying to be respectful of the context there. I would say down at Broadway, we have less context. So I would say you probably have some more freedom to do something other than, kind of what you see out there. So it should be an interesting process. I mean, we're really grateful to be involved because these bridges, well, nobody's really alive that was involved in the last one in the 1930s, and certainly nobody from 1907 for High Street. But so it's a great opportunity for all of us, this generation, to kind of set the course in something that'll be here for at least 100 years.
One more
Yeah,
question.
no, I was just going to add, these are going to be real iconic bridges, I mean, that will last for a very long period of time. I was remembering the Tower Bridge. I think we had a vote on the actual repainting of the bridge, and there was very active interest in it. So I think the aesthetic aspect is something that we're all interested in seeing more of. Maybe we'll talk about that on High Street in particular, because these are really going to be very visible features of our community. I just wanted to mention the general plan again, because I'd like to see that in a staff report. I appreciate you mentioning that, but sometimes I have a difficult time understanding how these specific designs fit within kind of our larger policy here. So like the City of Sacramento's general plan and West Sacramento's general plan obviously inform how we design this bridge. Maybe we can put that in the staff reports or put a little more context to these discussions that we're having. Because I was having a hard time understanding the function of the bridge because these ranges that we're talking about in terms of vehicular traffic are substantial. And my comment would be on the neighborhood-friendly bridge definition, which doesn't seem to be based on VMT or actual numbers of cars we're moving. I would prefer that we refine that definition to some extent, and we err on the side of not necessarily taking traffic off. I think you said the Pioneer Bridge, if I'm not mistaken, that's the interstate freeway,
Yeah,
right?
50, yep.
We're talking about Interstate 80. So that has a very different character if we're designing a bridge with additional lanes to take traffic off the interstate freeway system versus something that is basically handling a lot of local traffic or through traffic or really connecting two communities like Sacramento and West Sacramento. So I think my neighborhood-friendly bridge definition would be more oriented towards the two-lane version of it, and also handling traffic that's not necessarily diverting traffic off an interstate freeway. And so, keeping that in mind, all the projects that are mentioned that are going to be built, on both sides of the freeway, the residential projects off Broadway, which are adding lots of housing units. There's a lot of development along the riverfront on West Sacramento side. All of that suggests to me a little more attention to the pedestrian, bicycle elements of the design of the bridge, because we're going to have a lot of people living within close proximity to that bridge that can utilize it without driving a car. I mean, we could have literally, 5,000 new residences. So I'm trying to focus on the definitional part of this too, as a comment to the council that we should really try to refine the neighborhood bridge friendly definition if we can, certainly as we go through this process to balance it more in terms of a local function, not an interstate function. So that was my one comment. The other question I had was on these alternative alignments. What kind of outreach was done with the community and the neighborhood groups in and around the area associated with the bridge design?
So we haven't yet reached out to the community. That's going to happen on the 23rd, later this month. We've worked with both cities, then staff, and essentially the three alternatives or the three alignments that we're showing we're trying to bracket in the possibilities. So the three there's the most northerly, which is really functionally, you can't go any further north, and that's the one that ties kind of right into 15th. And then the most southerly is similarly constrained, because if we go any further south, we get too much skew on the bridge, and also we heard from the Coast Guard, they don't want us to go further south, because when we met with the barge pilot, it was an interesting process. He basically showed us how he's going to drive this thing. There's a curve in the river to the south, and so that's what he's looking at when he's setting up for that next curve, and that's how he figured out where to put this bridge. And so so that's the three alignments, and then we've got one in the middle that could be a hybrid. So really the alignments are kind of the feasible alignments in terms of north and south, kind of bracketed, but everything in between is all fair game. And as this thing evolves, we'll find, for example, Kinder Morgan's got a petroleum line out there that affects the southern. So I expect that as we do more work, we'll be working with the community, and we'll also be looking at the real constraints. And I would think I'm guessing here, but I think when we enter the environmental process, we'll probably have two alignments, and then probably 2 or 3 bridge types that it could be. So that's probably the range of alternatives that we're going to study.
Okay, and Broadway, is that, part of that is a state highway, right? Or has it been relinquished to the city?
Which part? I'm sorry.
Portions of Broadway, we're a state highway. I want to say between 15th and 19th Street. I think all that's been relinquished. I'm just trying to establish kind of that street. That's basically a local street. It's not managed by the state at all. At one point it was, but.
Right, and
yeah.
I mean, I know all about the 12th and 16th and all that, but
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that about Broadway. But as far as I know, Broadway is entirely owned and, and maintained by the city of Sacramento.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, on your first point about, and now I'm saying and I'm forgetting, I'm sorry, can you tell me what was the neighborhood friendly?
Oh, no, I was just saying that it's a definition, all right, we don't have the definition in front of us, but as it was read to us,
Right.
It didn't sound like it was specific to vehicles, or how many vehicles you're designing the bridge for, if you will. And I was just making the point that the design range is so broad, it could literally be, I think we talked about it as an arterial street that could take traffic off the interstate. I was just making my comment that my definition of neighborhood-friendly bridge is that it really functions more in terms of connecting two cities and really needs to be balanced more multimodally in terms of pedestrians and bikes because of all the development around the bridge. That was the point I was making, as opposed to taking traffic or being an alternative route for traffic. off the
Right, and thank
interstate.
you for
And that was
reminding
my
me.
comment in terms of, to the extent that we have a definition on this thing.
Right, and I think, that definition would be a clearer definition for Broadway, and for that matter, for I would be helpful for us, the designer, and trying to, get you what you all want. I would say, but we're very much on board with the concept. And so, for example, when Jason said that one of the criteria is that a new crossing would not result in a dramatic widening of the adjoining roadways. So how I interpret that, for example, if we went out and tried to do a 4-lane bridge, what we know already is the 4-lane bridge will create all sorts of intersection improvements and other improvements down line. And so under that situation, we're going to start to potentially violate the intent of neighborhood friendly. Whereas if you do 2, we're not going to see that as much. So I think I like the idea of a better definition, but I just want you to know that we're taking the kind of the foundation of it, and we're really paying attention because we need to get this right. Not, all of us need to get this right. It's going to be huge, so. One other comment on the interstate, the US 50 traffic. I think that, I think it just bears saying that, there's a bunch of people up on 50 that are using it because there is not a local choice. And those are folks that are going to go work downtown. And so I think we need to be a little bit careful about that. I'm not suggesting we do 4 lanes. I always try to remind myself that, the folks that are coming off that bridge are not the ones that are going through the area. Those are the same, that's us. We're trying to get from maybe home in West Sac to a job
Yeah, I mean,
downtown.
for example, I'll take a shortcut and get on the freeway, but if I had a local alternative, I'd certainly drive across the bridge, if it was convenient, yes. But there are people driving through the community as well, so.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's really interesting about this project, and it's been recognized for quite some time, all the way back when the city did the Jefferson interchange study, maybe 6, 7 years ago, I think it was, is we recognized at the time that if you build this bridge, you're not going to have to put as much money into fixing the Jefferson interchange because this bridge would relieve that as well. So there's a lot of diverse benefits that this project can deliver.
I'd really appreciate your comments, Mr. Peterson, regarding the ensuring that the bridge has, is adequate for all modes of traffic. I think that's a really, really important consideration to make in this particular bridge. And also to consider inducements to additional development and how we would like to see that development take place. And then also what traffic flow would have on local communities. And, showing, for example, the scenario that has, traffic going on Jefferson and split with South River Road, what that would do with, with possible improvements to Jefferson versus the other route, and, what that would have to do for South River Road. I want to make a comment about the outreach, community outreach. It says here this meeting represents the first workshop, but this is not a workshop format, if you will. Usually a workshop has, a much more broader public participation component and has, a sign set up and boards and things for folks to, and a place for folks to easily provide their comment, their written comment, or if they need to, their spoken comment. I would highly recommend that you address that, because it looks like the second workshop will be scheduled for a city council meeting. Or is that just at city council?
No, there's, for the city of West Sacramento, this is what you would call a commission workshop. So this is for the commissioners to freely discuss ideas, to, instead of having a rigid agenda where we give you a presentation and then move on. This is an opportunity for all the commissioners to provide input. This is the earliest stage of this process.
Right,
So
right.
there hasn't been any public meeting conducted to date. Broadway
Right.
Bridge is literally just kicking off. So we
Which-
wanted to get the input from our commissioners and our council, and we call it a council workshop, where the city council can provide the same input that you are doing now, where there is a discussion. Now, there is a difference between having a public workshop or a public forum for people to communicate ideas and discuss, different concepts. That's going to be coming up, and that'll be at the elementary school over in city of Sacramento. We are, again, this is the feasibility study phase of this project. This is not the PAED or the PS&E. There are several other phases for this project that is going to be, before we even start seeing anything happen, it would be 2025. So we still have a lot of steps to go. So you are literally the first ones to get an opportunity to start making comments for us to start making direction toward actually generating some kind of public outreach strategy or some ideas for the bridge.
Right. That's why it was a recommendation and not a frustration or anger. But yeah, it's a really strong recommendation that those outreach, because I did see that the community participation outreach is only scheduled for the city of Sacramento and not the city of West Sacramento. That was why it kind of popped in my head, well, is there going to be a public participation component for West Sacramentans, especially living in the communities that this will be impacting?
Any additional questions? Comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Any public comments?
Thank you. I'm Larry Stetson with Upper Land Park Neighbors. I've been involved in this process for over 20 years. When the city of West Sacramento has identified a bridge in Sacramento, we supported having a bridge study done in the feasibility because a neighborhood-friendly bridge definition was adopted. And in that definition, it talked about having the same number of lanes, I believe, as Mr. McCoy pointed out. I think it was 2 lanes, or the existing lanes that are there. Having said that, I also wanted to answer a couple questions that came up here. The 160 freeway was relinquished from Caltrans probably 15 years ago, so that is all open. I have a couple questions also, and that is, how far out is the study going to be? On the diagrams up there, they show the traffic going, I thought, past 15th or 16th Street, and the farther you can go west and south of Broadway, because the residential neighborhoods will be impacted. The comment that you raised about having a high bridge, we went through that with the River Crossings Advisory Committee for several months, and everyone from West Sacramento and Sacramento agreed that a neighborhood-friendly would be a lower-looking bridge because it wouldn't have to drop into West Sacramento or Sacramento extremely long distances. I think it was past Fifth Street in Sacramento. So the same things that you mentioned for West Sacramento are true for the Sacramento side. So we would like to see a bridge that's functional, as Mr. Peterson pointed out. The area south of Broadway, west of Muir, is scheduled to be built out very quickly. The Docks PUD is there, and we would like to see local traffic, not more traffic off of the Pioneer Bridge and 50. So we look forward to the community meeting on the 23rd. I also was interested why there wasn't a community meeting in West Sacramento, and also wanted to know if there was going to be a briefing of the City of Sacramento Council members. So with that, I just wanted to give you some background and let you know that we are going to be very actively involved in this and want to make sure that the bridge is positive for both communities. Thank you.
If I could respond to a couple of questions there. So the City of Sacramento will be providing updates. Jesse Gothen is co-managing the project over on the Sacramento side. As you may know, City of Sacramento is the project lead for I Street Bridge, with the City of West Sacramento supporting. It's opposite for this bridge, where the City of West Sacramento is leading the effort, with the City of Sacramento supporting. Both Jesse Gothen and myself are working side by side on both projects. So as far as the communications with the City Council over in the City of Sacramento, they will be advised of everything that's going on here, as well as what's going on over there. And then with regards to the public meetings, as I said, we are in the feasibility stage. There will be subsequent stages where we're going to have more extensive public outreach. We are providing a council workshop here, as well as the commission workshop, which is all televised, open to the public. We are also going to be, in subsequent phases, doing more extensive workshops once the PAED phase moves forward, which will include citywide efforts. So there will be much more outreach to come on both sides of the river.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item number 6, I Street Bridge relocation project update.
Thank you, Commissioners. The item before you is an update on the I Street Bridge replacement. The purpose of the staff report is to provide an update on the project and give the Commission an opportunity to pose questions, as well as provide other comments. The staff report provides background on the project, including cooperative efforts between the City of Sacramento and City of West Sacramento in defining the purpose and need for the bridge crossings, as we've already been discussing with the Broadway Bridge. It also describes the guiding policies directing the bridge design, including the neighborhood-friendly bridge concept, which applies to both bridges, as well as efforts to obtain funding for the project itself. Unlike the Broadway Bridge feasibility studies, as I had mentioned, the City of Sacramento is the lead for that project, with the City of West Sacramento providing support. In March 2013, the City of Sacramento and West Sacramento City Council adopted complementary resolutions directing the city managers of both cities to pursue funding for the I Street Bridge. The Federal Highway Bridge Program, they were successful in obtaining $88.9 million in funding for the bridge replacement project, which, as you may currently know, is identified to connect C Street with rail yards over in the City of Sacramento. The workshops were completed for I Street Bridge replacement project, I believe they are ongoing, to review potential alignment alternatives. We've also screened different bridge types, as we're doing right now with Broadway Bridge, and reviewing opportunities and constraints associated with the bridge construction. Recently, a public meeting was held on June 19th. That was actually not recently, it was a year ago, 2014, at the Stanford Gallery in Sacramento to introduce the project and bridge replacement goals and to receive public input. There was in-field analysis of the Sacramento River that was conducted September of 2014, as was done with Broadway recently. Attendance was provided by both cities and was led by the U.S. Coast Guard that determined the need for the 278-foot horizontal clearance for that area due widely to the influences of the American River and the existing water tower. Based on the data, the consultant team was able to prepare an initial screening of the different bridge types and clearance requirements set by U.S. Coast Guard. Subsequent environmental scoping meetings have taken place, as well as community open house and a walking tour that was held on October 9th, 2014. In January 2015, an extensive traffic analysis was conducted by consultants Fair and Peers as part of the Mark Thomas and Company team. The study included extensive analysis of 10 alternative bridge and approach scenarios, which it conducted basically a matrix of all these different alternatives to determine some of the greater impacts versus the lesser impacts of each of these alternatives. The results carried forward 2 alternatives. Both of these alternatives had the least amount of impacts, and they were 2-lane bridge alternatives. Again, following the neighborhood-friendly bridge concept, we determined that those were the 2 recommendations to move forward. Several project team meetings were held over the next several months, attended by representatives of the City of Sacramento and West Sacramento, as well as Caltrans and FHWA, that's the Federal Highway Administration, in order to interpret the traffic model data, to discuss the bridge type selection, analyze the impacts, and review the different construction timelines. In that time, the geometric approval drawings, or known as GADs, were produced, as well as bridge advanced planning studies, which are also referred to as APS. Those were prepared by the consultant team and circulated for review by Caltrans and the Federal Highway Administration. On June 3rd of this year, the West Sacramento City Council heard a presentation on the I Street Bridge replacement project and provided comments to staff and the consultant team. At present, the consultant team has recirculated the GAD and APSs. They've identified the potential area of effect for the environmental analysis, and we are starting to commence with environmental technical analysis phase of the project. Additionally, staff is currently working with Caltrans and FHWA on those elements of the bridge that would be eligible for project funding through the Highway Bridge Replacement Program. It's FHWA and Caltrans to determine what elements of the bridge are actually going to be fundable or could be funded by the program versus those elements that cannot be funded by the program. Those are determined by Caltrans and FHWA. So right now they're looking at the design, and we're receiving comments on those elements. And that's the update on the I Street Bridge project, and I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Yeah, I don't know if I have to recuse myself. I live in Metro Place, which is right where the bridge lands. And so one of the reasons I'm on this commission, I do believe, is I'm supposed to kind of look at it from that perspective because, you know, there is an existing neighborhood there. One of my questions is the criteria include, in terms of analysis and impact, you know, impact on either existing structures? There may be structures that are within that right-of-way. And I guess, just the whole neighborhood aspect of the potential impact of the bridge. While I think it's going to be a great enhancement, certainly for pedestrians and bikes, to get across the river, it has the potential to really increase traffic volume. So I guess my question is, maybe for you, the consultant, what kind of traffic analysis either have we done, or when in the process does the traffic analysis occur to give us some actual numbers? And I'm talking about relative to the design of the bridge and relative to the capacity of the existing bridge, which I think we already noted has some limitations.
I would like to point out
Yeah.
that the consultant you're referring to is Mark Thomas and Company.
Yeah.
Mark Thomas and Company are not present.
Okay.
The presentation is just an update provided by me. I wanted to clarify that For this commission, this is a policy level commission.
Right.
Not a project level. So I'm providing the update for the commission per your request. But as far as a policy level, the policy is in place for us to actually move forward with these different bridges, but I'll try to answer those questions as well as I can. The traffic analysis was conducted by Fair & Pierce, who are also the consultants for the Broadway Bridge as part of a different engineering team. So both of the analysis for the Broadway Bridge and for the I Street Bridge were conducted using the same metrics, looking at the build-out potential of both the rail yards and the build-out potential of the city of West Sacramento's Bridge District and Washington Specific Plan area. As far as the impacts go, the environmental process for the I Street Bridge is just starting. So what we're going to do is start looking at the traffic analysis that was conducted. A lot of the reason for eliminating different bridge configurations was due to the influence of different bridge designs, whether it be 4-lane, 3-lane, 2-lane, as we had discussed with Broadway, to pull regional traffic away from some of our freeways and some of our larger arterials into a neighborhood in order to accommodate these crossings. We found that with the modeling, that when you reduce the number of lanes, it reduces the influence of people using that connection. It also reduces the number of impacts on the neighborhood. So all of that's going to be, has been identified and is going to be studied in the environmental document that we expect will be moving forward probably in the next several weeks. And you'll be seeing probably an environmental document coming forward over the next year.
So that's when we're going to get some actual numbers in terms of.
Correct.
Okay. And as I mentioned, there are some localized impacts depending upon the specific alignment. That also will be analyzed in the environmental document as well.
That's correct. And in following the neighborhood-friendly bridge policy, we're seeking to reduce the impacts that are associated with potential widening on both the Sacramento side and the West Sacramento side.
I have a question. Does the end of using automobile LOS for CEQA impacts, is that having an effect on this document, or did that come in under the wire?
Well, the city council at the, I would say, 3 or 4 meetings ago, when there was a presentation to the council on the general plan. We are currently, the city of West Sacramento is involved in a general plan update. The council's direction was to remain, our current LOS policy is to remain until the actual guidelines for CEQA analysis are to move forward. You know, different vehicle miles traveled analyses, whether that be looking directly at, you know, the bridge or looking at the general plan as a whole, that's going to be determined probably in the future. But for now, LOS is still kind of our standing guideline. It's not, you know, it's kind of the strange limbo right now, understanding that the law is moving forward, but at the same time, you have to maintain what you have. So what we're trying to do is kind of, the term is split the baby and look at both vehicle miles traveled, VMT, as well as level service LOS, and understand that both have impacts and can drive, LOS can drive the potential for over mitigation at times, where if you try to accommodate and mitigate for traffic, you wind up widening approaches, you wind up widening lanes, which actually has a bad effect on a community. VMT is supposed to change that. Until we get those standards, we're trying to follow both.
Right. Well, that's really great news to hear, because that's probably not something that's happening in very many places because of cost constraints or concerns, or, you know, wanting to hold on to LOS. So I really appreciate that's the direction you're taking. Is there a timeline, a general timeline for construction and development, or are we still too early right now?
As far as I Street Bridge, we're looking to get the bridge constructed by 2020.
Okay.
So you're going to be seeing construction start around 2018. So backtracking around that time, you're going to be seeing final EIR at that time, Caltrans report. We'd be looking for approvals from FHWA as far as participating costs, and all of this is currently ongoing. So Right now, the preliminary GADs are what's being circulated at this time.
Right. And then one last question. Considering the recent developments around rail yards with the soccer stadium and Kaiser facility now, and are those kind of playing havoc with the number crunching or trying to figure out what's really going to happen? Or are you making just pretty positive estimates for development in the rail yards?
The impact is not as much as you might think when you start looking at, a 2030 horizon of the traffic analysis and full build-out potential of the rail yards. When you start looking at the stadium, which is more internal to the development of the rail yards, it is understood, and I believe that the environmental has just initiated for locating the field, the stadium, soccer stadium over in rail yards. So it is being considered, but I believe that the impact is going to be minimal when you compare the scheme of things. It is supposed to be primarily local serving that we're targeting with these bridges. So a lot of that regional traffic you would see using I-5 as opposed to using a local bridge.
Well, that actually kind of leads to another question. Considering, the type of development like a soccer field, where you would expect more regional travel, has there been any conversation around possible spillover effects and how to adequately accommodate folks, say with the broader one? Because there are some regional level building going on in Sacramento right now with Kings Arena, for example, and then the MLS Stadium. Not that those will be the only one, but is there any broader conversation around that and around how to move more people without having to build a whole bunch of parking? I know that the Kings Arena, they're saying there's sufficient parking in downtown currently, and so that's they're keeping away from that, but.
You're asking me to characterize the city of Sacramento.
Not exactly, I'm not going that far.
Unfortunately, I can't.
But I know that some of that spillover may happen in West Sacramento, and I just want to ensure that we're not taking our limited geography and using it to house more cars, for example, than instead of more people.
You may recall, I believe it was the last city council meeting, perhaps the one before that, where Chris Doherty from the Public Works Department presented a description of the parking management that would be taking place in downtown West Sacramento. So that would be the Washington District and the Bridge District, as well as Civic Center, with regard to the potential for spillover parking due to the arena. We're working toward establishing a contract between the city of Sacramento and West Sacramento for parking enforcement on this side of the river. So the answer is yes, we are aware of it. Yes, we are in the middle of discussion and contracting in order to move forward with initial enforcement of parking over on this side to maintain the integrity of our streets once the arena itself starts moving forward, as well as when the soccer stadium moves forward over on the Sacramento side.
Yeah, I was just curious, just how those might be playing into the traffic demand models and such. That's why I brought it up.
Right.
Not just in parking in and of itself, but as it's impacting say the I Street Bridge.
I think it's a really good point, and it's something that we'll make sure that we keep in mind when we're looking at the model.
You know what might be helpful is maybe as a diagram next time, when we ever get another update on this, is to put some context again, because I think the circulation, as I understand it, off the rail yard side is going to Interstate 5. I'm not clear exactly where it's going from the rail yards, but if it's just going across the bridge, I think there would be more of a concern then.
Right. We were just discussing, the cross-sections would be brought forward to the commission after, for these different street layouts, et cetera. So when that time comes, after we start developing some of those, we can bring those forward.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had some involvement in the rail yards when I was working as a planner in the city of Sacramento, and I know it's supposed to be highly transit served. That's the ideal. With the extension of 7th Street of the light rail system. But also just the internal circulation, because right now you look at it, there's kind of a backbone set of streets, but I don't think people understand how people are going to get out of the site on the freeway. So, you know, obviously, because I Street could be a path of least resistance. So that's why I was asking, maybe at some future date, we understand that better, because I think there are some designs that intend to move the traffic more to Richards, as well as there's an I Street reconfiguration that's going to be significant at some point. So that's always helpful for the community, because we're looking at it thinking all that traffic's going to come our way. So that would be helpful in terms of future information.
Okay, any additional questions? Thank you. Let's move on to the next item. Downtown Riverfront Streetcar Project update.
So this item for you is also, was requested at the last meeting of the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission for an update on where we're at with the streetcar. Again, the staff report provided a pretty extensive background on how the streetcar came about and some of the funding sources for streetcar, how the alignment itself was determined. In more recent history, so starting in April 2014, the FTA approved an application by SACOG, that's the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, to enter into the Small Starts program. The acceptance by FTA meant that the dollars spent to develop the streetcar going forward would be eligible for up to $75 million in a federal match, which would be 50% of the total cost of the project. FTA instructed the partner agencies, that would be Yolo County Transportation, that'd be City of West Sacramento, City of Sacramento, SACOG, and Sacramento Regional Transit, to conduct an environmental review of the project and prepare a local finance plan. Engineering plans were completed to an initial 30% level, and federal environmental review was initiated for the project. 1/3 of the total 3.3-mile streetcar loop is in the city of West Sacramento, whereas 2/3 of the project is in the city of Sacramento. Therefore, our contribution to the total $150 million cost is $25 million. As the staff report indicates, we had Measure V and Measure U that were brought forward in 2008 to residents of the city of West Sacramento who voted in favor of providing funding for from a sales tax initiative for both flood control improvements as well as for streetcar. So our contribution of the 1/3 contribution of the streetcar cost is already in place for the city of West Sacramento. However, the city of Sacramento still has their additional funding to provide, which is a total of $50 million, of which $7 million has been committed by the Sacramento City Council. $3 million has been committed by the County of Sacramento. And then there's an additional cost of $10 million that's assumed to be coming from the state of California, as a large number of state of California properties are in the city of Sacramento itself, with the remaining $30 million left to be financed. So a vote, as you probably do know, it's been definitely in the media, a vote came forward for residents for a community facilities district. There was an initial vote from property owners which came back affirmative, that a majority of the property owners were in favor of providing a special benefit tax to themselves in order to advance the streetcar project. When that final vote was brought before the residents of Sacramento within 3 blocks of the streetcar, it actually fell behind. I believe 49% was the total affirmative vote. Therefore, where we're at now with the project is the city of Sacramento is currently discussing kind of a Plan B alternative. So at this point in time, we are advancing some of the things that we can advance, and that's some of the design, looking at procurement of streetcars, as well as utility infrastructure development, and coordinating with different utility agencies until such time as the city of Sacramento has in place either a special benefits district or whatever finance mechanism that they're looking to introduce in order to bring about the other remaining $30 million funding on their side. That provides an update on the streetcar. If you have any other questions, please let me know.
So that $30 million contribution that was turned down, is that the critical path, if you will, issue that has to get resolved before we can move forward? It sounded like the city of West Sacramento, we had our funds pretty much identified, but we have this gap on the Sacramento side. So how do you see this kind of evolving going forward in terms of trying to resolve that?
It would be unfair for me to characterize what Sacramento is going to do at this time. There's a lot of, you could speculate as to different options that they have. Retooling Community Facilities District could be one. At this point in time, I don't have any information from the city of Sacramento that could lead me to characterize what they're going to do. We are advancing what we can advance with the project. So we had different agreements with the city of Sacramento, Regional Transit, YOLO, ourselves, in order to provide enough funding at the initial start of this project to advance the design and advance procurement. So at this point, we are in a holding pattern until that is resolved.
Okay, I have a question. So assuming this initial stage goes smoothly, now in the next step, because when we're talking about the Broadway Bridge, we're talking about possibility of accommodating streetcars. So down the road, do we have any plans of extending the streetcar tracks down south and through the Broadway Bridge, or maybe even further south to the South Portland region, so that people could really benefit from the streetcars and be more environmentally friendly?
One thing I'm proud to say with the city of West Sacramento is that we plan very far ahead. And as far as the design of the bridges go, we are designing both I Street Bridge replacement project, which would be the connection between C Street and rail yards, as well as the Broadway Bridge to accommodate future streetcar, future rail, what have you, in the design. So that means that we're making sure that there is a balance with the engineering. One thing to point out is that Tower Bridge itself, if you've looked at past streetcar press releases, they identify one track going down Tower Bridge, and that's for a specific reason, and that's that Tower Bridge cannot accommodate a double track because of the structural design. So the structural design for both of the future bridges would be designed to accommodate some kind of future rail transit, whether that does move forward in our lifetimes or not. We are preparing for it. The same with different projects like South River Road, for instance, and some of our other roadways that we're looking at. There's a way to organize your utilities so that there are fewer conflicts if in the future you do decide to plan for having streetcar. On the West Sacramento side, when streetcar does move forward, we will have significantly fewer utility conflicts. So in the future, if we decide to move forward with rail, then we can do that.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, let's move on to general administration function. For Part A, calendar. So is the staff going to provide the?
Next meeting is September 14th.
September 14th. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And item B, additional reports from city staff?
No additional reports at this time.
Okay. Any future agenda item requests from commission members? No?
The general plan, I guess my request would be, I think we had an update on that last time. The general plan, as I understand it, is being done in-house. And I guess at some future date, it would be, I think it was David that was here. Is there kind of some big schedule for that? And, the circulation element, which is obviously pretty key to everything that we do here. Is that being done in-house? Just some general questions about that. I think I might have asked him last time, but it sounded like everything was being done in-house on the general plan. So maybe just a short status report on where we are on that.
I'd be happy to provide that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional comments? No? Okay. Any motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.